very easy to get lost in this big place. And so we don't want any of our nurse residents to feel that way. So our goal is not just to support you at the beginning when everything is new, but the goal is to support you throughout this first year of your professional career. So during your first 2 to 3 months, we check in with you, with your preceptor, your manager, your educator, and your clinical nurse specialist at 3 set scheduled intervals. And then we meet with you 1 month after you've transitioned into independent practice at the 6-month mark, the 9-month mark, and the 1-year mark. And these are formal, dedicated, like 20, 30-minute check-ins, which have a variety of different topics. So at the beginning, it's a lot about acclimating. Do you have the right access? How do you feel working with your preceptor? What kind of patients are you taking care of? What's working, what's not working? And then as you kind of go through, let's talk about professional development. What are you interested in? How are you using your education time? What support do you need to get to that kind of next role development point that you're interested in? So it's really walking through this first year with you and knowing that you have people checking in and kind of helping you get to the direction that you're trying to get to. These are just some snapshots of our nurse residency program. This was back in, I want to say, January before COVID. This is cohort 30. They will graduate in November. And this is them working through some case studies and then doing a puzzle activity on communication and finding the words that work when you don't have all the information you need. Unfortunately, all of our seminars are now via Zoom, but we look forward to eventually coming back to that live environment. This is more like what our seminars look like. This is cohort 29. They recently graduated. The reason I put this slide in is these were their evidence-based literature appraisal topics that they reported out to the entire organization. So we invite all members of the Stanford healthcare community to either come in person when it's live or listen to your evidence-based literature appraisals. That's anyone from the physician groups to infection prevention, to case management and social work, to patient experience. Obviously, nursing has a very strong showing at these, but these are just some of the great topics that some of our nurse residents did. Anything from cryotherapy to N95 respirators for COVID patients. So the opportunities are endless. Okay, so a little bit about our cohorts. As you know, as you may have heard, and as you can see, our cohort participation is drastically increasing. So Stanford has, along with our executive leadership, is really determined in growing the nurse residency program, expanding into different areas, including the emergency room at some point, the ambulatory setting, the interventional platform, and really making the future of nursing and a pipeline for future nurses a priority for Stanford. So for fiscal year 2020, we had 116 members participate. We have a 99% retention rate. We did have one nurse resident who left before the 1-year mark due to some personal reasons, and it happens. But for the majority of our nurse residents, they stay for up to a strong group, 3 years. And then around 4 years, we see the number change a little bit as life events happen and people move, people go back to school, people take on different roles outside of the organization. So really hanging strong at that 4-year retention rate. So our cohorts, we offer 3 cohorts per year. We have a fall cohort, normally in October, spring is in February, and the summer cohort is in June. And currently, these are the areas that we hire into. So we do hire into the critical care environment. We have 5 ICUs at Stanford: neuro, trauma, cardiac surgery, cardiac medicine, and medicine oncology. We hire into oncology, which is vastly growing. So for all of you future oncology nurses, the oncology department at Stanford is growing. That includes blood and marrow transplant, hematology, and oncology. And then the surgical acuity adaptable unit and the medicine acuity adaptable unit hire into every one of their units. We also have an acuity adaptable float pool which hires, and those float pool nurses, nurse residents have a bit of an extension on their orientation, because the expectation after completing orientation is they will float to up to, I want to say 30 different units. And then we have an observation unit. So the observation unit, for all intents and purposes, functions just like an inpatient unit. 12-hour shifts, day shift, night shift. You care for patients in the inpatient setting. The observation unit is attached physically to the Stanford Healthcare building. The reason it's considered observation is purely because of billing purposes. So these are patients who come in from the emergency room, or patients who have a procedure, maybe a cath lab procedure or a pacemaker procedure, in which their length of stay will be less than 72 hours. So because of that, they go to a dedicated unit. If for some reason they need an extended time, over 72 hours, they're moved to the inpatient setting. So these are just a snapshot of all of the areas that we hire into. Okay, here is our timeline. So for those of you who will be applying for our cohort 34, this is our February cohort start date, February 22nd. The application is actually going to open quite soon, October 19th, and it will stay open till November 6th. And then cohort 35, that is our June summer cohort. That application will stay open or start on March 1st and stay open until March 19th. And then our fall October cohort, that application will open in June and close on July 9th. The reason I put the panel interview dates in here, not only for your reference, but also because a question we often get is, what if I don't have my RN license? Can I apply? Absolutely. You can apply even if you have not taken your NCLEX and do not have your RN license. But here's the caveat. You need to have your RN license by the Friday before the panel interview. So for example, if you apply and you are selected, Kevin will call you and he will say, Mary, the team has selected you to sit for a panel interview. Panel interviews are July 14th to the 22nd. Do you have your RN license? And if you say, no, Kevin, I don't, but I'm taking it on January 7th, he will say, great. I will call you on January 8th and confirm that you have your RN license so you can sit for the panel. If for some reason you don't pass or you're unable to get a testing date, we will not be able to offer you a panel interview, and you'll have to forfeit that position to another applicant. So just take notes. This is all on the website. If you go to Google and you put Stanford Healthcare Nurse Residency Program and scroll down to the bottom, all of these dates are there for your reference. Okay, some other questions that we get is related to COVID. So we all know there's been a lot of changes within our world, our personal and professional lives, due to the limitations and restrictions that COVID has caused. So what is some things that have remained constant with the nurse residency program? One is that we are committed to still offering 3 cohorts per year, and with that, growing those cohorts. So let's just do some perspective. Cohort 31, they had 37 members of their cohort. Cohort 32, 46. We have a cohort that just started today. That's cohort 33. They have 55. So we are growing the cohort steadily. So know that there is more to come with that. We have recently expanded our program this past summer to include the critical care environment, and the goal is to extend probably in the summer timeframe to the emergency department as well. So what have we done to kind of mitigate the effects of COVID? So as you know, as I mentioned, all of our nurse residency program seminars have gone virtual, and so has the interview process. So our panel interviews, as it stands right now, they are all done virtually. We also realize that there's a lot of stress and isolation and kind of chaos that COVID has created in a lot of the lives of our nurse residents. So we've really shifted some of our curriculum very early on to emphasize stress management, self-care, nurse resiliency, and we keep coming back to those topics as we go throughout the year. A lot of focus on how do you care for yourself during a pandemic at Stanford? How does Stanford care for you? What are some of the things you need to know? And then how do you care for patients in the midst of a pandemic? So kind of a lot of work as we've seen the shift on how we care for patients change since before COVID and now with COVID. We also realized that some of you who are recent graduates, maybe your last semester, your last few months of your nursing program were very different. Perhaps your classes went virtual, or your clinical rotations became simulation, or you were at a site and then you were no longer allowed to be at that site. So we realized that there were some changes, and so we want to know where you're at. We know there may be a gap for some of you coming in. And so during your first week of orientation, we have you take a very interesting, fun, and interactive kind of artificial intelligence assessment. And so basically you're given a series of 15-minute videos or vignettes, and you respond to the computer on how you would manage that situation. And then we are given the information based on kind of what you typed in. It's not a grade, it doesn't determine anything. What it does is give us insight of where you are as a cohort, so we can flip and change our curriculum to meet you where you're at. We also have done a lot of work. We were partnering with San Jose State and using their simulation lab, but due to COVID, that is no longer an option at this time. So we have created our own simulation lab and bringing you through simulation as well as a skills lab at Stanford. So still allowing you to have that and kind of enhancing those opportunities, so you have more option to kind of get your hands on things and try things out. One thing we get a lot is if a clinical rotation, especially a senior preceptorship, if we give points or we weight the value of this preceptorship versus this preceptorship. We do not. If your preceptorship was canceled, if your preceptorship was virtual, if your preceptorship became a call center, we understand that. Please know we will accept your application regardless of your clinical preceptorship. Okay, so now I'm gonna kind of switch gears. That was a little bit about the program. And now we're gonna go to probably why you're all here, about the application. Okay, so when I speak of the application, you may be like, I'm trying to grasp what Stanford is looking for. And so these two statements, I hope kind of give you a little bit of what we are looking for in that candidate. So we follow a mission-aligned admission selection process that takes into consideration an applicant's experiences, attributes, and academic contributions, as well as the value an applicant would contribute to our learning, practice, and teaching. We evaluate applicants based on who will contribute to Stanford Healthcare's nursing community in meaningful ways. By evaluating an application from a holistic perspective, we take the time to get to know the applicants as the unique individuals that they are. So we don't look at just one thing. We don't look and say, this is their GPA, or this is their clinical experience, or this is their volunteer experience. We look at everything. And we align with two areas. We align with Vizient because we are a Vizient nurse residency program. So you will see questions that ask about leadership, professional development, perhaps quality outcomes. And then we align with our professional practice model. And that's this little thing in the right, the globe with the hands. So it exemplifies shared leadership, again, professional role, how we deliver care, how we collaborate, our emphasis on education and research, professional development, and then our values of honesty, excellence, advocacy, teamwork, and respect. So you will see questions that maybe don't call specifically out, but they align a bit with, oh, I see this is probably advocacy, or I see they're looking at how I have developed professionally. So you will be able to gauge kind of what we're trying to align with. The requirements. So basic requirements for the Stanford Healthcare Nurse Residency Program will be on the application site when you open it. So these will not change. I'll go through them, but you will see them again. So you have to be a graduate with a BSN or an MSN, accredited by the Accreditation Commission for Education and Nursing or the Commission on Collegiate Nursing Education. Your official graduation transcript date can be no greater than 18 months from the cohort start date. So if the cohort start date is February 22nd, you need to graduate within that 18 months prior to February 22nd. If you currently work as a registered nurse, that's fine, but you cannot work more than 6 months. More than 6 months work as a registered nurse will disqualify you from sitting for a panel interview. And then you must have a completed application. So the requirements of the application are a cover letter, a resume, and on the resume, we ask for 3 requirements. Again, please tell us all about yourself, but we want to know your clinical rotations, placement, and hours spent at each area, any work experience, and please tell us your role, your responsibilities at that role, and your time frame of employment, and any volunteer experience. Please provide again what your role was, what your responsibilities were, and the hours volunteered. We also ask that you provide the name and the contact information for the individual who supervised all of your volunteer activities. We then ask for 2 School of Nursing clinical faculty instructor reference letters. So only 2 letters of recommendation. You only need to submit 2. We're going to read 2, and they are to be from your clinical instructor who supervised your clinical rotation. It doesn't have to be your capstone. It could be community health. It could be peds. It could be adult. It could be labor and delivery. Whomever you feel will speak and have insight into your practice. It is not to be your preceptor. So it is the clinical instructor that is affiliated with your School of Nursing rather than the preceptor who is assigned to you by the hospital. We ask that it be on school letterhead and that this individual signs their signature area should have their School of Nursing faculty position. We also ask for your transcripts. They can be official or unofficial. And then that you complete the electronic application. And the electronic application will have some demographic information. It will ask about work history. It will ask about education history. It will ask references. It will ask if you know anyone at Stanford Healthcare or if you ever worked at Stanford Healthcare. And then it will have 3 to 4 questions specific to you that you will be able to answer. Okay, so cover letter. People always say, Kerry, what is Stanford looking for in a cover letter? So generally a cover letter is your introduction. You're going to introduce yourself to Stanford Healthcare and you're going to explain your qualifications and you're interested in this nurse residency program. You share your technical skills, you share any work experience, but you also don't want to forget those soft skills. What motivated you to become a nurse? Why did you choose this profession? What have you done to get to this point? What have you overcome to get to this point? And then what makes you uniquely qualified for this role? And that's the accumulation of a variety of different experiences. So yes, academic, yes, clinical, yes, work, yes, volunteer, but perhaps military or personal. So don't forget those experiences that make you who you are. And then why Stanford? What do you think Stanford will bring to you? And what do you think you can offer Stanford? And how are your values aligned? Okay, resume. So you can submit a resume that's 1 page. You can submit a resume that's 3 pages. We will read everything that you submit. I did get a question that Kevin sent me, and it asked if a computer reads the application or if a live person reads the application. A live person will read your entire application. It takes about 30 minutes for them to read your entire application. So again, for the resume, this is the opportunity for you to show us what you have done, to highlight all of the best attributes. Again, we're going to ask you to provide us with your clinical rotations, whether you want to put it in a table or list them, the location and the hours. You do not need to tell us what your responsibilities were at each of those sites. You can simply just list them. Again, any work experience, clinical or non-clinical. Some people think they leave the non-clinical stuff out because that's not relative. Let me tell you, a lot about nursing is what you bring. Customer service, flexibility, accountability, professionalism. So a lot of work experience, even though it's not clinical, is still really important. Same with military experience. We welcome all of those experiences. If you've had a nursing internship or externship, paid or unpaid, this is in addition to your senior clinical hours, please share that with us. Again, any volunteer activities, share. Your licenses and certifications, these are just examples. Please don't run out and get certified or take a bunch of classes in NIHSS. It's just an example. So if you are NIHSS certified, or maybe you are a mandated reporter certified, share that with us. It shows that you have a passion for something. We want to know that about you. If you're a member of an organization, if you've received an award or you've published articles, again, please share that with us. And then your references. Okay, letters of recommendation. So again, 2 letters of recommendation written by clinical faculty, not your preceptor, written on school letterhead with a signature line that shows the faculty's role at your School of Nursing. The letters of recommendation do not have to be written to Stanford Healthcare. We realize that it's very competitive to find a job, so you are applying to multiple different residency programs. We completely understand that. So it does not have to say, "Dear Stanford Healthcare, so-and-so so interested in working at Stanford." It can be a very general statement, "To whom it may concern, Mary's interested in your organization's nurse residency program." Totally fine. What you do want to say to the individual who's writing this letter is, "Can you please provide some insight into my work as a clinical nursing student?" So it may be that they're also your theory professor, and so they're talking about your academic standing in the classroom. That's totally fine, as long as they also share about what some of your clinical strengths are. So how did you perform in the clinical setting, whether it's an inpatient or outpatient setting? Were you a team player? Did you collaborate? Did you show compassion? Were you trustworthy? Do you have critical thinking and prioritization skills? Kind of whatever those nursing characteristics are that you possess, have them allow those to shine. Okay, so then there's the electronic application part. The very beginning of it is very general demographic information. It will ask you about your school, bachelor's, and if you have any other degrees, again, work history. This is where it will ask for contact information for your employer. You're allowed to list your references. It will ask for licensing and certification. And then at the very end, it will ask you to rank in order of preference what specialty area you would prefer to work if you were hired into the nurse residency program. So if you really want to go into the ICU, you would say ICU number 1, maybe oncology number 2, medicine 3, surgical 4, whatever that looks like for you. Just so you know, what we do with that information is, should you get offered a panel interview, I will say to Kevin, we only offer your first and second choice. We don't want to put you in a specialty that you don't want to be at. So if you met all the criteria and you put ICU as your first, we're going to put you in that ICU panel. If you are what we consider an alternate, and you've almost met all the criteria, but you're our next section, but your preference, you wanted ICU, but all the ICU panel interview positions are filled, but next you chose surgery, we're going to offer you a surgical seat. So that's how the preference works. Okay, so the meat of the application, where most of the points are weighted, are the application questions, again, between 3 and 4. And for those of you who have applied in the past, you will notice that the application questions change with each application. So here are my tips. Read the question fully so you can answer the question fully. Understand what is being asked so you can respond appropriately. Usually the questions have multiple components, and what I mean by that is that question can be, let me see, I was actually writing the questions today. So here we go. Tell us about a time when a patient, this is not a question, but I just want you to get the idea. Tell us about a time when a patient or peer's point of view was different than yours. What did you do to demonstrate understanding of their point of view? What did you learn from this situation? So it's essentially asking for 3 things and 1 question. So that's when I said, read the question carefully, break it down to the components, whatever you need to do so you can answer it fully. I always ask people to be as detailed as possible because we only know what you tell us. If you've done something remarkable, make sure what you're telling us sounds as remarkable as what you did. And then think about those unique experiences that reflect your character. Take time with these questions. Kevin usually posts these questions when the application opens on his social media, or you can open the application, you can look at them, and you can write them in a Word document and then upload them into the electronic application. Take your time. Don't feel like you have to sit in the actual electronic application and fill it in as you go. I recommend that when you answer the question, try to describe what you did rather than label it. For example, if the question is about how you served another individual or provided a service, and you answer by saying, I worked as a strong patient advocate, the reader might say, what does that mean? What did you do? So instead, you want to say, this is what I did. I collaborated with the patient's family, and the primary team, social work and case management, to set up a family meeting. I scheduled the meeting and then spent time prior to the meeting to review some of the questions the patient had verbalized to me that morning. I wrote them down and had them accessible at the patient's bedside. I encouraged the patient to rest before the meeting so he was fully awake and engaged during the meeting. I knew the patient was nervous about the meeting, so I reminded the patient that I would be present, and if needed, I would ask the questions on his behalf. So by me reading that, everything that was said in that statement, I would say, this individual served as a very strong patient advocate on behalf of this patient. So really describe what you did rather than label it. The other thing I will mention is if the question asks, tell me about a time during a clinical rotation, answer the question about a time during a clinical rotation. If it just says, tell me about a time that you demonstrated leadership, tell me about a time that you demonstrated service to a community, that is your opportunity to go beyond your academic or clinical setting. You don't have to. If you're like, I have a really great example of how I did this and it was during nursing school, great. But if you thought, you know what, I was in a prior employment opportunity and this is how I did that, or I served in the military, or I had this, you know, I'm a mom of 4 kids and this is how I have done time management, whatever works for you, share that. Okay, so here are some questions that you can see. Again, we're taking that kind of holistic approach. Discuss a person, incident, or experience in your life that has prepared you most to become a nurse who will care for a diverse population of patients. All students can contribute to the creation of a diverse and inclusive environment when diversity is defined most broadly, whether by a personal attribute, characteristic, culture, experience, or behavior. Please tell us how you believe you will contribute to the diversity of Stanford healthcare. Obtaining a college degree requires persistence and the ability to stay focused on the end result. Share with us a long-term goal that you had, the steps process you took to obtain that goal, and how you overcame any obstacles that you encountered. This goal could be academic, personal, or extracurricular in nature. So again, not all focused on your clinical rotations and what you did during your bachelor's or master's nursing program, but trying to get to know you as a whole person. The way I try to differentiate the two is the application is saying, who are you? What are your behaviors? How do you act? The panel interview will be more on what do you do? What have you done in the clinical setting? How will you perform? So the way the recruitment works is you all apply. Kevin does a very general pre-screen, which basically makes sure you meet those kind of 3 buckets of criteria, which is a BSN or MSN, graduation date not greater than 18 months, and no more than 6 months work experience, and then that you have all the components. And then he says to my team, which he did this last cohort here, Kerry, here are 78 applications for you and your team to screen. And so what we're doing is, there's about 9 of us. We screen and look at all of your characteristics and say, this is the Stanford nurse that we're looking for. And then we take this group of around 200 and we present those individuals at panel interview to the managers. And the managers then say, you have brought us the vision of that Stanford nurse, that professional nurse who's a leader, who has caring heart, who's an advocate, who's a team player, who's respectful, who's honest, all those values, right? And now we're gonna ask them the clinical questions and understand how would they perform in the clinical environment. So that's a little bit how you differentiate the two. Okay, moving on to some general questions, and then I know we have some questions in the chat. These are some of the questions that we got previously, so I'm just gonna go through them very quickly. Yes, you can apply to the nurse residency program before graduating from your nursing program, whether it's a BSN, MSN. However, you must have completed your nursing program, so graduated, and have your RN license by the Friday before the panel interview. So for those of you who are thinking of applying in October, but aren't graduating to December, that's okay, you can apply. The one thing to remember is before you can sit for your RN license, you have to have graduated. So it's a narrow time frame from graduation to taking your RN license. We review all applications regardless of when they're submitted during the application posting period. So if you apply on the very first day that it opens, or you apply at the very last day at the 2 minutes before it closes, doesn't matter, we review them all the same. In fact, when I get them, there's no timestamp associated with them, so they literally come to me in alphabetical order. Again, letters of recommendation. We get a lot of questions on letters of recommendation. 2 letters, so if your friend or cousin or former physician works at Stanford and wants to write your letter of recommendation, that's great. It's not necessary because the ones that we're looking for are the 2 letters from your clinical faculty. If you have way more from your clinical faculty, we ask that you pick your top 2. Again, you can submit an application without having an RN license. There are no exceptions to this. That was a question. We do not make exceptions. Previously, historically, for some perspective, we allowed individuals to sit for the panel interview without their RN license, and then they never got their RN license. So it puts us in kind of a very strange situation. So a couple years ago, the decision was made that everyone who sits for the panel interview has their RN license. We do not accept interim permits. Stanford Healthcare and Lucile Packard Children's Hospital have 2 separate residency programs with 2 different application processes and different cohort timelines. Lucile Packard, which is the pediatric hospital, and also mother-baby. So if you're interested in labor and delivery, Stanford Healthcare Adults does not have that specialty. Lucile Packard does. So you will want to apply to Lucile Packard if you're interested in pediatrics or labor and delivery. Mother-baby type specialties, they offer 2 cohorts a year. And again, go online and look under Lucile Packard Nurse Residency Program. Christina Rivera is their coordinator. Can you use some of the same documents if you have applied previously? Yes, you may, of course. And like I said, all application components are reviewed by a live person. Internal applicants. So Kevin, you might be better suited to answer this question, but internal applicants, there is a different application that you will receive because it will prompt you at the beginning, are you currently an employee of Stanford Healthcare? And you will hit yes. You will get the same questions, it's the same requirements, but on our end, it flags you as an internal candidate. Again, resume and clinical rotations, you don't need to describe or list your responsibilities. You just need to say Med-Surg 1, El Camino Hospital, 120 hours. Spring 2020, however that looks. Question that I got multiple times on the Q&A that was sent over by Kevin are, what are the opportunities for professional growth and development? So many. And that's what makes Stanford such a great place. So once you hit your 6-month mark, you are promoted to a clinical nurse 2. And with that comes your education benefit. So that's not only money, so it's $1,800 per fiscal year, but it's also 36 hours paid of time that you would attend education training classes. So that's not mandatory training, that's not seminar, that's not ACLS, that's education or training that you choose and that you're interested in. And Stanford will not only pay for the class, but pay for the time that you attend the class. It also includes conferences, like series, maybe you want to take, managing challenging conversations, or the crucial conversations series, or the critical thinking series. So depending on what your interest is, we have a Center for Education, which offers a variety of different courses, which continually is updated and changing. You can also get certified. So if you are in the ICU specialty, when you hit your 2-year mark, you can get your CCRN. And if you're in the AAU, you can get your PCCN. And oncology, you can get your ONC, oncology nurse certification, which makes you a certified nurse. There's also specialty training programs. So if you come in the acuity adaptable unit, and you worked for a few years in the AAU and you're feeling like you're ready for a new challenge and you want to go through the ICU training program, they happen 4 times a year. ED training program about twice a year. So a lot of opportunity to internally grow. We do have a nurse promotion ladder. You will all come in at clinical nurse 1s. You will be promoted automatically at 6 months to clinical nurse 2. And then you can go through the clinical promotion ladder for 3 and 4 based on whether you meet the criteria, and then you submit your portfolio. A lot of opportunities to develop within your unit: preceptor, charge nurse, float nurse, unit expert. You can do in-services when new equipment comes out, and then a lot of opportunity to grow within the organization. So I started as a new grad. I was able to become a preceptor. I was able to become a charge nurse. I went back to graduate school during that time. I got my master's in healthcare administration. I did an interim assistant manager role, then went and took a permanent manager role. Did that for 6 years, then really felt like my drive was professional growth and education. So took an opportunity with education, and now I'm sitting here with all of you. So tons and tons of opportunities to grow and kind of seek out where you want to go. Again, a lot of opportunities to implement projects. If there's anything consistent at Stanford, it's change. Stanford really prides itself on having the most robust innovative practices as well as technology. So new things are always coming in. And so there's always opportunity to become one of those individuals who's the expert in the left ventricular assist device, or the artificial heart, or the ECMO machine, or the new type of chemo med, or the CAR T treatment, whatever that may be, and receive specialized training and then kind of teach your peers. A lot of questions about shared leadership, shared governance. We have a very robust shared leadership committee. This is a picture of everyone under patient care services, which is nursing, who is part of shared leadership. And really, they meet monthly, and you have a small subset that's on your unit who represent your unit with research, innovation, professional growth, quality, informatics, practice, and education. And they go to a much larger committee once a month and really learn what the organization is doing or what nursing is doing, and really trying to push things forward and make changes, not only that affect nursing, but that affect our entire enterprise. So they do a lot of really awesome work. Again, clinical rotation hours are not weighted. Okay, so how do we select you into the unit? So again, you pick your preferred specialty, and our goal is that we put you in your first preferred spot. If not, we would offer you your second spot. You then sit for the panel interview for that specialty. So if I choose ICU, I would sit for the panel interview for the ICU, and the ICU hiring managers will be on that panel. After all of the ICU candidates have interviewed, it's usually a 2-day panel for ICU, those managers come together and collaborate. And they talk about all the candidates. And they will say, you know, I really like Mary. I think she'd be a good fit for the trauma ICU. I like her energy. I like how she answered these questions. I think she'll fit in with my culture. And then they will offer Mary to come for a unit level interview. And the unit level interview is a bit more intimate. You really get to meet the management team, the clinical nurse specialist. Sometimes you'll meet, COVID aside, you'll meet other nurses, you'll get a tour of the unit. And the questions are less behavioral style and a little bit more, you know, tell us what you're looking for, tell us about your goals, what are you passionate about, and an opportunity for you really to ask those questions. So should that manager feel you'd be a good fit, then they will extend that offer to you. Rather than you sitting through the panel, meeting the different managers, and then selecting the unit that you want to work at, they will select the unit that they feel you would be a good fit for. Nurse residents are hired into day shift or night shift or rotating positions depending on the staffing and skill needs of the unit. So it really depends on what unit is going to offer you that position, what the shift is. A lot of questions on diversity and inclusion. Kevin and I are doing a ton of work around this, which we're super excited about. Really, our goal is to broaden our applicant pool and really include and diversify the individuals who are applying to Stanford. Currently, and Kevin can chime in, the demographic information gets pulled out of the application. That is for Kevin's eyes in HR, and then for screening, we don't see that. We don't know your age, we don't know your race, we don't know your sexual orientation, we don't know if you're male or female, unless you explicitly put it in your cover letter or your question. So we screen essentially blindly, and that is so we don't have any implicit biases of our own affect the outcome of the application. The other thing that we are really committed to is continuing our discussion on what the social determinants of health are and what implicit bias is within our healthcare system. And so we have experts in those fields come and actually speak to our nurse residents during their seminars. So we can start those conversations really early because we know it exists. And so we want to be open to those ideas and give our nurse residents the education and prepare them. So if they are to enter a situation in which they feel like bias is dictating the care of a patient, they're able to speak to that and advocate on behalf of the patient. Okay, so I know there are lots of questions. I'm gonna leave this on the screen. So I asked cohort 32 and 31, I saw them in seminar over the last couple weeks. I said, I am meeting the nurse residents in cohort 33 this week for the first time, and I'm doing a webinar to prospective nursing colleagues of yours who are interested in applying to the program. And this is the tips that they have and the advice that they have for any new nurse coming into the Stanford Nurse Residency Program. So it's kind of a gift for all of you. Take what you wish. Some of them are really great, but I just wanted to share those with you. Okay, Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, it's question time. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay,
yes.
Awesome. So the first question, Kerry, what or when is the latest that I can take the NCLEX in order to be eligible for this specific program, the February 2021 program?
So your NCLEX, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but you will need to have on the Board of Registered Nursing website, when we go to look up your name, it will have to say that you have successfully passed the NCLEX and you have an RN license identified with your name by the Friday before the panel interview dates, which would start the following week.
Correct. As long as I'm able to verify it online, guys, by 11:59 p.m. that Friday, you're all good. And I think you covered this already. It was a frequently asked question on the chat. For past applicants, do you suggest changing our resume, cover letter, and or personal statement? And what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think your resume kind of speaks to what you've done. And so unless something has changed and you've added something or you've done something or you are now working in a new place, then yes, update as needed. I think what I really recommend people to do is that so much of who we are as a person is what brought us into this profession. Nursing is the most trusted profession in the world. And the attributes that you have, the compassion and the empathy and really just wanting to care for those in need is not something that we are able to teach you. It's something you have learned. It is something that is ingrained in you. And it's whether you had an experience where you saw someone do it or someone did it to you, or you just have a natural passion for this, tell us that. Because so much about nursing is the connection. And so we want to know what brought you here. So I think if your cover letter doesn't show a little bit about your journey to the profession, it doesn't have to be this crazy story. Mine certainly wasn't. It was just really an innate feeling that I wanted to do more for people. And I really felt like I had a connection and I shared that. So I recommend if you don't have that in your cover letter, I would add that.
Another question, for the 6-month limit, does that include doing some kind of COVID relief testing, screening, that type of position?
Yes, if your title is a registered nurse.
What if your volunteer experience is not healthcare related? For example, I serve food to the elderly. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's amazing. And I would absolutely say that.
One of my professors moved schools and doesn't have letterhead from his previous school. So if he submits a letter without letterhead, is that acceptable from your perspective?
So you might want to ask that professor to add that to the letter at the very bottom.
If your preceptor also happens to be one of your school faculty members, for example, an associate professor, would that be acceptable?
Yes, just have them, when they write your letter of reference and when they sign. Okay, wait, no, I might not be answering that question. So if that preceptor was assigned to you by the hospital and that's not the clinical faculty who's overseeing that clinical rotation, then no. So I think what I'm understanding is this is a preceptor who works at San Francisco General, who also works at your university, but for your situation, they're functioning in the role of your preceptor rather than your clinical faculty. So no preceptors, only clinical faculty who oversaw your clinical rotation. So this is the person who gave you the grade, who said, they attended, I passed them, I collected all of their care notes, I met with them for debriefs. That's that individual.
And I could probably answer this, and you, Kerry, you too. When submitting our answers to the essay questions, is there a word limit on the application? No, there is no word limit. However, sometimes with the current system right now, our system does time out. So my advice for you is when I release the questions on my social media channels, prepare some type of Word document so you already have your answers so that you can go through the application process quickly. Kerry?
Agreed.
Okay. Next, Kevin, Kerry, for the rank specialty preferences, are there certain specialties that are more popular with applicants, and does that affect our chances to get a panel interview? Thank you in advance.
Yes, so the ICU area is very, very popular. I think the last go round was about, out of the 678, I want to say around 300 selected ICU. It's a bit more competitive for those areas, but I will say if that is your passion and that is where you want to be, then definitely rank that area as your number one choice. Because this is your professional development, and you want to start your career in the place that you feel best meets your needs and where you will be most successful.
Recruitment related question, I can answer this. do we accept a temporary California RN license, especially for those coming from another state? We do, as long as you're in the process of, applying for your perm license. We'll accept that temp. Next question. Hold on. I recently graduated this past June and have been collecting letters of recommendation since February. It says here, the letter of recommendations that I wanted to submit are dated for February of this year. Is this acceptable from your perspective?
Yes,
Kerry?
absolutely. Yep.
On the
Definitely.
resume, should we include virtual hours for clinical placement or only in-person hours?
Both. Both.
Okay, I started my job September 1st, and Stanford new grad program starts February 22nd. When we would I be eligible for the program if that's the case?
Is that 5 months?
I'm counting
I just had to do it on my hand. It's 5 months, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you're eligible. I don't have the answer to this. It says ED, hold on here. So do you have any insight regarding the emergency room and their new grad residency?
So the goal is we'll expand in the summer. I don't even know what month we're in right now, October. So the summer,
October.
So the June program, sorry. And it will be very, 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 very small. They will not be a separate residency program. They'll be part of our residency program, but we will have new grads in the emergency room. What will most likely happen, just for all of you, if you're interested at that point, is after the February application period closes, Kevin and I start our marketing campaign, and then we will start marketing about the emergency department. So until you hear otherwise from us, we're not taking nurse residents into the emergency room. And then once we say yes, and this is the cohort, because we don't want to give mixed messages that we're starting them in February when the goal is the summer program.
And then Kerry, along those lines, someone messaged me on Instagram asking about an OR, new grad program. Do you know anything about that?
Nothing in the works as of right now, but that would be amazing. Trust me, it's on the list.
Yay. Now, another great question. If we're hired, can we switch unit during the nurse residency program?
Yes, so after 6 months, you can transfer units.
Now, another question, another theme related to the 6-month work limit. Are we considering full-time employment or part-time employment?
So when you are hired, you are not hired through the Stanford Nurse Residency Program. You are hired by the unit manager, and you are a full-time 0.9, that's the full-time position at Stanford, clinical nurse. And then you participate, there's mandatory participation in the nurse residency program. So 0.9 is 3 12-hour shifts. And again, what that shift looks like will be at the discretion of the unit manager.
And here's an internal applicant. Will there be a link posted for internal applicants? Basically, it's the same posting, but when you go on our internal or when you go on the main website, you can click where it says, I am a current employee, and that's where the internal applicants can submit their application. And like Kerry said, it's an abbreviated version. They just ask you, where your current unit is, where you work, what's your status, but then you'll still have to submit all the required documents and answer the screening questions that Kerry worked on today. Hold on, I have a few more. Random, is there a page limit to the cover letter, Kerry?
No.
What things impress you when you interview candidates?
Okay, so interviewing. So we will do a webinar on interviewing before the panel interviews, but it's all behavioral style interview. So those are questions about what you have done in the past rather than what you would do in the future. So that serves as the best predictor of how you would respond given a similar circumstance going forward. So a question would be, Sarah, can you please tell me about a time when you had to prioritize patient care? What did you do? How did you respond, and what was the outcome? So again, multi-component. Usually you'll be asked what the situation was, what was the action, and then what was the outcome. That's usually how behavioral interviewing goes. One thing that I always recommend, especially if we're doing virtual interviews, is you again want to allow kind of that true self to shine through. So virtual interviews, one of the things that gets managers thrown off is if they think people are reading. So if I'm constantly looking over there as I'm talking to you guys and it's very scripted, it looks like I've been writing answers and I'm trying to find the right, okay, this answer will work. And then I just read and I never make any eye contact. A lot of nursing is kind of that natural ability to connect. It's thinking on the fly. It's being comfortable communicating with people, even in stressful situations. So you want to practice a little bit, and then you want to come and just have a conversation, right? Very rarely do we have the opportunity with our patients to be scripted. We usually walk in and we have no idea what's going to come at us, so we need to adapt. So it's having that confidence and being able to have that conversation. I will say practice. If you practice, even though it sounds silly and you do it in a mirror or you do it with your friends, it decreases your anxiety when you sit down to do it. And so you don't become so flustered when the question is asked. It's also great to think of all different types of behavioral interview questions. And we talk about this in the webinar, but basically think of all of your clinical rotations and what it means to be a nurse. Communication. How do I escalate care? How do I deal with a challenging patient situation? How do I deal with conflict? How do I deal with mistakes? How do I deal with teams not working together? How do I deal with prioritizing different needs? How do I advocate? How do I delegate? You think of all those different aspects and kind of come up with little scenarios that meet all of those and practice walking through those. I also recommend know the audience that you're interviewing for. So if you're interviewing for an adult unit, whether it's at Stanford or somewhere else, don't give them all pediatric clinical answers. It's very difficult for a manager to visualize how you would work in their environment if all of your answers are about a different environment. It doesn't mean you can't talk about them, but if I'm interviewing for peds and all I talk about is community health, it's a little difficult for the manager to say, okay, this is how Kevin would adapt in my unit. So just be mindful of that.
Is there an estimated timeline of when we would know if we are going to be moved forward to panel interviews in mid-January? And I would answer this, but I don't have the dates because if I minimize my screen, the recording stops. I learned that earlier.
Minimize mine, will the recording stop? Hold on, guys, because I got all this information. Hold on.
So heads up, guys, when I upload this later on, the first 14 minutes of the presentation is missing. So I'm sorry, that's my fault.
Okay, here we go. Timeline, here we go. You see it? Okay, so application post, can you see that, Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay, application post the 19th. We screen between November 9th through December 4th. A little wonky because of the holiday, but Kevin has essentially December 7th through January 13th, but realize that there's a holiday to set up the panels. And then here are our panels. And then you'll notice offers are made very, very quickly after you interview. So you interview for the panel, then that same week, the nurse manager will say, I would like to bring you back to the unit. And then by the end of the week, there's an offer to HR.
Kevin and Kerry, would I receive more points for being a past employee at Stanford?
No.
Is it the first time that I heard of float pool? Can you explain this position a little bit, and would you recommend this position for those who are not set on what specialty they want to work in?
So float pool, there is an acuity adaptable float pool and there is an ICU float pool. So you would be hired into the acuity adaptable float pool, meaning you would provide care to patients in the medical region, the surgical region, and the oncology region. You would not be expected to provide the specialized skills that are specific to that specialty, meaning you wouldn't give chemo, you wouldn't take care of fresh lung transplants if you didn't receive that training. You wouldn't take care of a left ventricular assist device. You wouldn't take care of a patient who's being externally paced if you haven't had that training. So you have a lot of very strong foundational knowledge. I think the float pool, so I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I've been a nurse for 15 years. I hated floating all the time. Like fish out of water, stress, like, ooh, don't know where anything is, forget how to be a nurse for like the first 20 minutes. And then it's like riding a bike. If you're one of those people who like structure and you like to know where everything is and you like to people, float pool is not your game. If you're one of those people who's like, I make friends super easily, I love the challenge, I love going to this place for 4 hours and then floating to this place for 4 hours, I'm cool and calm, float pool is probably for you. It's more of a personality match than necessarily a knowledge match, or I don't know what specialty I want. You got to have that personality, and that's what the manager in float pool is looking for when they interview.
Another question, if we are not selected for panel interviews and or unit-based interviews, does that mean we did not get the position? Yes, and you'll be notified the week of the 14th. Hold on here. For students who are attending the entry-level master's program FNP, do you consider graduation after we receive our BSN and are awarded our BSN equivalency letter, or at the very end of the program with the MSN degree?
So I think it could be either, to be honest with you. If you're gonna stamp the BSN and that is your end of education and that's where you want to have that timestamp, then that's fine. We've had people who've gotten their BSN, continued full on school because their program included the MSN, and then that becomes their timestamp.
What do you recommend for students who did not have a preceptor during their nursing program? Is there a disadvantage or preference for having a preceptor?
I'm trying to understand the question. So no preceptor, meaning, I'm not sure I understand. Is it a preceptorship? Maybe a senior preceptorship?
Hey, Kerry, that question was from me, if you don't mind me clarifying.
Sure.
So many of us who are on here go to the same university. That does not include a preceptor for our nursing program. We're in the entry-level master's nursing program. And our program does not include a preceptor. Instead, we have a quality improvement project.
So you're talking about like your senior capstone preceptorship. What school do you go to?
University of San Francisco.
I'm a graduate of USF. Okay. Yes. So, no, you're not at a disadvantage. We hire a lot of USF individuals who go through that same program. I will say, if you get to the panel interview and they ask about your clinical rotations and it's a clinical question, focus on your other preceptor. Like, you're fine that you had your quality improvement, that's part of your master's curriculum. But if the question is clinical, then answer about clinical content. Does that make sense?
Yes. So
okay.
Will there ever be a question directed towards preceptor, and can we
it could be a leadership question. It could be, how did you work with teams? Yeah. Sometimes they'll say, like, can you provide us a time when you had a challenging, patient interaction? And then that should be like, well, during this rotation, I had this experience. But if it's, tell me a time that you had to work quickly on your feet and step into a leadership role, then you can speak about your master's project.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And then Kerry, a clarifying question from Brooke. What I was asking before is about the 6-month time limit working as an RN that excludes you from the program. Is that 6 months of full-time work? But what about 6 months of part-time work? That's a good question.
I don't know the answer. I was going to ask you, Kevin.
I know, I was going to look at you.
We've never had that question before.
We haven't, but Kerry, let's talk about it offline, because part-time, that's significantly less hours than, so I would say yes, but let's touch base and I'll post it.
Brooke, email us, okay?
Yes.
Yep, will do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Brooke. It says here, do you only require the BSN transcript? I was in an accelerated program. I did my prereqs at community college, and my first bachelor's was at a different university. I'm just trying to figure out how many transcripts to request. You guys, if you don't have the funds to pay for a transcript right now, that's perfectly fine. If you could just do one of those unofficial online transcripts and just PDF it, you could include that as long as it says that you graduated.
And
Kerry?
yes to Kevin, and we only need your nursing program, your bachelor's. So if you have a different degree, we don't need the transcripts for your different degree.
For clarification, since nurses on the AA units care for patients with all different levels between ICU and MS, what would differentiate a patient from receiving care in the actual ICU versus in the AAU?
Oh no, sorry, I apologize. So it's intermediate ICU rather than ICU. So we still have the intensive care units, and then the acuity adaptable is a combination between med surg and intermediate ICU. So intermediate ICU is a level of care that requires cardiac monitoring. So individuals who are on telemetry and usually who need interventions that are greater than 2 hours or greater. So every hour intervention or every 2 hour intervention. The ICU is still the ICU environment, 1-to-1, 1-to-2, very, very frequent interventions, patients who cannot maintain an airway, who are intubated, who are sedated. For all intensive purposes, the ICU is the ICU. And then the AAU is a combination of your med surg patients, which for the state of California is interventions between 4 and 8 hours. So I would go and provide care at intervals of 4 to 8 hours versus intermediate ICU, which is 2 to 4 hours.
Once we get into Stanford, it says that there's no break for 1 year. And what does that entail? And are we always working weekends?
So we ask for your commitment. It takes a lot of time and energy and finances to orient nurse residents into the program. And so we ask for your commitment of 1 year. Can you leave prior to 1 year? Yes. Can Kevin and I do anything about it? Absolutely not. But we ask that there's a partnership and we are investing in you and that you invest in Stanford for that 1 year. What was the second part of the question?
Oh, hold on. Oh, do we work weekends all the time?
So you are part of a union, you part of the Corona Nursing Union, and so you are offered every other weekend as part of your Corona contract. Now, if that unit is overstaffed on a weekend and you get that off, it's again based on the staffing and skill mix of the unit, but essentially the expectation is every other weekend.
Another transcript question. It says here, if we're not graduating until December 18th, do we give the transcripts that we currently have? Yes, just whatever you have currently, that's perfectly fine. And then if you're selected for an interview, I'll just confirm that you've actually graduated. So you met the minimum requirements of the program. I know Stanford's program is super competitive. Is GPA an automatic cutoff for certain units or the residency? Some hospitals I applied to in the past did. I graduated from Duke with a 3.2 and currently working at another level 1 academic ICU, but I'm hoping to come back home to Stanford. So GPA, what are your thoughts? Kerry?
Not a cutoff. So GPA comes into consideration when Kevin calls me a week before the panel interview and says, I had 2 people withdraw from the panel interviews because they didn't get their RN license or they took another job. I only need 2 people to fill the oncology panel interview, let's say. So then I go back to my grid and I go to the next 2 people and everybody has the same overall score. They all have their RN license. They're essentially totally the same. Then I flip it and I look at GPA and I rank it and say, Kevin, here are the next 5, call them in this order. So that's when GPA comes into effect, really as a cutoff.
Is volunteering an important factor of being accepted into our program? And if so, how many hours would you consider as good?
So I think volunteering is always something that we pride ourselves on, and we want to give credit to those who do volunteer. I would say that individuals who are volunteering more than 100 hours get credit on their application.
For residents who leave prior to 1 year, does that affect their future job applications? My answer from the HR perspective, it just depends on the situation. You know, as long as you leave in good standing, you know, no disciplinary actions in your file, it's a non-issue. I'll have Kerry, you know, speak to it from the nursing perspective though.
So I think as a former manager, I think it is a little bit of a red flag unless you're able to speak to that. I think it is, I think people look at nurse residency as 1 year. Moving from job to job, usually 2 years is your sweet spot. It's when you're no longer really, really new and you've reached that level of competency that Patricia Benner says, you know, that novice to expert, you hit it around year 2 to 3. So hiring managers may look for people in that 2-year mark. Again, not always the situation, depending on where you were, you're looking to interview and apply. But my recommendation is try to stay for at least that 1 year, unless, like Kevin says, there's a reason. Guys, if you can mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you.
When will we know which specific units will be opening up spots for this current cohort for February?
So all of ICU will be hiring, all 5 ICUs. All of oncology will be hiring, all of surgery will be hiring, and all of medicine will be hiring.
Is there a particular program you would recommend for someone who's interested in psych nursing or mental health?
You know, that is not my area of expertise. We do not offer the nurse residency. We do have a inpatient psychiatric unit, both a locked psychiatric and a non-locked psychiatric unit. But we do not have nurse residents in that department. I know that there are psychiatric units at UCSF. Langley Porter has one. I know San Francisco General has a very, very large inpatient psychiatric, multiple units, as well as St. Mary's has a pediatric psychiatric. Actually, St. Mary's Hospital in San Francisco is the pediatric psych hospital of San Francisco. So if that's something you're interested, I would look into at least those 3 organizations. And I know I'm leaving out, I'm sure San Mateo County has one and Sierra Cluna Valley Med has one. A lot of the county hospitals do. Marin General has a psych emergency department, not an inpatient unit, but an emergency processing center. So I would check out those areas and see if they're hiring nurse residents. They probably are. And if that's something that you are interested, follow that passion, because we need really, really good psych nurses out there. And so I'm sure that they're looking. Whoever wrote that, they're looking for you. So apply.
And guys, I used to work at Highland Hospital in Oakland, and I know John George, they had
Yes.
a whole psych facility there as well. I know they did take new grads, but I don't know what the current state is right now. So that might be another facility too. I know we have about 5 minutes left. One of the questions, it says here, for those who don't get in, is there another clinical nurse 1 position that they can apply for without getting into the residency program? Or what are other ways that we can apply to Stanford Healthcare as a new grad?
So, and Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We only take clinical nurse 1 into the nurse residency program.
Correct.
There's not a clinical 1 position that you can apply to. I would say if you are not able to get a panel interview or receive an offer, don't sell yourself short. Again, highly competitive. We get a lot of applicants, and let me tell you, you are all incredibly qualified. It makes it, as Kevin knows, incredibly, incredibly difficult. And even for the managers, you all are very, very skilled and very smart and have a lot to offer. So don't sell yourself short. I think if it doesn't work out this time and you have an opportunity to apply for the next cohort, great. If you're like, you know what, I need to start working and this is an area that I can go and have a job, I'm going to tell you, we are growing and expanding. and we take a select group of nurse residents, but these inpatient units, outpatient units, ambulatory, ED, OR, the ICUs, they hire clinical nurse twos all the time. All the time. So you can get your feet wet at another facility, another organization. And if you really want to come back to Stanford, the opportunity is always there, whether it's travel nursing or a permanent hire. Again, follow Kevin. He is the nurse recruiter for all of us, all of nursing. And he's a great resource.
And guys, just to give you a heads up, I've hired people who left, went to Seattle, went to Texas, went to Florida, came back within 8 months. So, I mean, it is possible. It just depends on the current needs of the department. Another good question, Kerry, I'll take, this will be the last one. If your supervising nursing facility did not oversee your hands-on clinical experience, but only your preceptor did, how will they write a meaningful letter of recommendation?
So,
Ada, do you want to, do you need clarification?
I think I understand, because I remember this from when I was in school. So your clinical faculty wasn't really the person who oversaw the work that you did, and rather the preceptor could speak to that.
Correct.
I would recommend, so I hear you, if you can, I would recommend that clinical faculty member to speak with that preceptor, or ask that preceptor to write you a letter of recommendation and submit that to your clinical faculty and say, I need a letter of recommendation from clinical faculty in order to apply to Stanford. I know you don't know the ins and outs of everything I did during clinical, so my clinical preceptor wrote me this letter of recommendation for your reference. So they can use that and kind of the specifics of maybe the patient population or what you did or the attributes that you demonstrated, and they can utilize that in their letter of recommendation.
Thank you. That answers the question, just because I'm sure with a lot of people, the supervising faculty member just kind of oversaw,
Yep.
but it's the preceptor that I've spent like 500 hours with doing the work.
And then Kerry, one more. I don't think we have the number yet. Is there, do we have an estimate of how many new grads will be hired for the February 2021 cohort?
We don't have a specific number. Again, it's kind of the needs of the unit, but I would suggest it's probably going to be around the 55 or greater number. We had almost every unit participate, inpatient area. So there were 2 inpatient areas that did not. And so I'm thinking it will be around the 55 to 60 area number. All of the ICUs are participating, just so you know, and then all of oncology will be participating. So I think we'll be around the same.
All right, and my end, thank you guys. I mean, was this helpful?
Yes, thank you so much.
Hey, okay, good. Kerry, I'll leave it up to you.
So you guys, we always ask for your feedback because Kevin and I are really trying to meet the needs of our community, and you are our community and you are the future of nursing. You'll be taking care of Kevin and I one day, so we want to make sure you are well prepared and excited to be nurses. So if you could, it's like 4-question survey, just basically if you found this beneficial, and then it gives you the opportunity to free text. If there's something else that you would like, whether it's a similar forum or a different forum from Kevin and I, let us know, and we can see if we can make that happen. And as always, it was great.
Sorry to interrupt. I know many of us have asked where we can find Kevin on social media, but it hasn't been addressed. Can you share that to see where we can find you, or where you're going to post the application questions?
Oh wait, you're muted. You're muted, Kevin.
Sorry. Feel free to email me, guys, and I'll send it to you directly.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Kevin, your email doesn't work with me. Remember?
Oh my gosh, Cecilia, I am so sorry, girl.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I think you have a filter on my name. I don't know, but it's very, so I will contact you through a talent, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect.
All right, you guys, for those of you who are graduating in December, early congratulations. For those of you who have graduated, congratulations. Reach out if you need anything. We're excited for all of you. And whether or not you work at Stanford, the nursing profession is better off for having all of you. So best of luck to all of you. And I look forward to hopefully seeing lots of names come October 19th when you flood that application system and give me lots of work to do. But until then, have a wonderful week, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.